Welcome to the Modern CPA Success Show, the podcast dedicated to helping accounting firms stay ahead of the curve. Our mission is to provide you with the latest and greatest insights on cutting-edge tools, innovative marketing strategies, virtual CFO services, and alternative billing methods. Join us as we change the way people think about accounting.
Adam, we're about to talk to Jeff Bartsch today. What do you think our listeners are going to get out of this podcast if they pay attention?
Yeah, huge resource for us internally as well. I think the biggest thing is just demystifying storytelling. I think it's a key component to being an advisor, and we hear about it all the time. What does it mean? What are the tools that we can use? I think he's really good about kind of breaking that down for us and telling us, some really good practical tips on how to become better communicators.
I agree. And true to what he does, he's going to give some stories to give people really good examples of how this can work in practice. And you'll hear me say this during I think it's a key differentiator. Being a good advisor and being a great advisor, if we follow some of the tips that he talks about and do this well, I think it's a game changer for people.
Yeah, very important.
Great. I hope people really enjoy this. All right, we're really excited for this version of the Modern CPA Success Show. We've talked storytelling in the past. We're really going to dig into that today. I am Tom Waddleton. I am joined by my usual co-host, Adam Hale. Adam, welcome.
Hey, Tom.
And our guest today, Jeff Bartsch. And I will say from the beginning, right before I turn it over to you, Jeff, we have worked with you for a while, and I've personally worked with you trying to get better at my own story telling and communication. So I'm really excited for this conversation that we have and just letting people know that this is something where we are drinking this Kool-Aid and saying this is something we can really use in doing this. So Jeff, you want to introduce yourself a little bit to our guests and kind of say career story, kind of what got you to where you are today working with us?
For sure. Yeah. My name is Jeff Bartsch, and I'm a communication strategist and thought leader coach for the accounting industry. Now, some people think that communication skills are these squishy, undefined things that are kind of in the category of nice to have instead of need to have. I believe that communication skills are at their core human connection skills. And when we're talking human connection, those are must have when it comes to keeping clients, keeping your team members, and growing your business. So when people look at me, they look me up online. No, most of the time they see that, oh, well, Jeff, you spent 20 years in Hollywood, which is true. I spent about 20 years working with content, shaping content for ABC and NBC and Universal and Disney and Apple and Netflix and a whole bunch of others. And I thought that TV and movies were really the point of what Hollywood does. And what I've come to realize is that it's something much more powerful, much more fundamental to human connection than that. And the first time that I actually really experienced that was a moment when I was a kid, and it just kind of ended up setting up the entire rest of my life and entirely what happens with the clients that I serve now. So most of for the first 20 years of my life, I was known as Jeff the piano guy. And I was playing Bach and Mozart Sunday mornings all the time and getting all my reps in mostly and Sunday mornings at church. And everyone said, Jeff, you're such an amazing piano player. There was a day when an older musician at church came up to me and said, Jeff, it's nice to be able to play the notes on the page. You're doing the best that you can. But when you get older, you need to learn how to play from your soul. And when I heard her say that, I was 10 or 11 years old and I was in elementary school, and I thought that was the dumbest thing I'd heard in my life. It was like,
in fairness to a 10 or 11-year-old, maybe it was.
Yeah. Because next thing you're going to start talking about emotions. I'm going, emotions are dumb. Just forget that. So that was the thing that she said, and I just ignored her for years until I actually learned what it took to go beyond the basics, the fundamentals of playing the piano, and actually to bring the music to life. And when I started doing that, people's reactions started changing. Instead of saying, Jeff, you're an amazing piano player, they would say, Jeff, that song was the exact song that I needed to hear today. Thank you so much for playing that song. And then they would say every once in a while, Jeff, the way you showed up today brought me into an encounter with God. And so that happened when that stuff kind of started happening. I thought, okay, this is way bigger than me. There's something powerful going on. And number one, I need to get my ego out of the way because this is about serving others and making more of this happen. And what I had realized was I had found a way to just go beyond the basics and elevate those notes on the page into something extraordinary. And that's what I ended up doing ever since. Ever since I was 4, I'm 45 years old now. That's literally what I've been doing my entire life, is taking an ordinary message, elevating it to something extraordinary, and helping other people do that for themselves. So that's how I ended up making TV in Hollywood for 20 years. The next question is usually, okay, so how on earth did you end up in the accounting industry after spending 20 years in Hollywood?
Seems like a natural jump, Jeff.
I mean, why not?
Just natural transition. So
Another cool.
I mean, go ahead and explain it, but I got a feeling it's just going to feel really, really natural.
Yeah.
Well, as most stories go, it's a bunch of winding and dead ends that I won't tell you about. But just suffice to say, it took a lot of me banging my head against the wall, because early in my career in television, here I am. I'm literally living the dream, being a professional storyteller in the storytelling capital of the world. I saw myself hitting an income ceiling, and I wanted to start bringing in more streams of income. So I've always been a teacher or a coach in some way. I started doing that. I started teaching people who wanted to do what I was doing, be full-time television editors. And that worked great until I broadened my target market and I started offering things to people who didn't think they actually had a problem and didn't have money to pay to get it fixed anyway. And that was really, really hard for business, until I finally realized that the core outcome of storytelling is not just warm fuzzies, it's human connection. And I said, okay, how can we get this to people who need to build trust, to build empathy and understanding? And that's when I started moving more towards professional experts, consultants, and coaches. And a year ago at this point, this is when I had a conversation with Jamie Na and Jody Grundon talking about this. And we continued the conversation. And I've been working with you guys ever since. Yeah. So accounting chose me.
So you had to find somebody that was, one, not very good at it, clearly, and then two, people that had the ability to pay.
Well, to be fair, accountants, the accounting industry is not known for razzle dazzle and public facing appearance. But what I will say, what I didn't know a year ago, was how much of a rock star you guys are. Because everyone talks about AI is scary. Oh, everything's being outsourced. Oh, this is all scary. We need to move more towards advisory. But that means that we have to have clean numbers, which means we need to have accounting services, not just compliance service. Okay, well, we need to have that, and it needs to be all cloud-based. And that's a lot of work. You look over at Summit, they're like, yeah, we've been doing all that for years. We're good.
Right.
So,
yeah, but
you
then
guys
the
are
next
awesome.
stage, like you said, is also, creating those relationships and making sure that you're connecting with the people and you can translate those numbers into something meaningful for the client. Because kind of what we always talk about all the time is, a client can read their own income statement and their balance sheet. The problem is they don't really know what to do with it. And so I definitely am interested in hearing your kind of perspective on strategy as it relates to these communication skills, because we always hear that word, like be a strategic advisor, be a trusted advisor, and those kind of things. And we know the trust relationship is something you have to build over time, and you have to do it with having a certain amount of professionalism and business acumen. It's kind of permission to play whenever you're working with a client, so you can kind of slowly build that up. But whenever you're talking about, the financial numbers and everything, what I keep hearing from clients, and so this is going to be the question to you, is how strategy fits into it, strategy and really empathy, because those can kind of be two different things, into your storytelling. Because what I always hear from clients whenever I say, well, what does strategy mean to you? And then they get very specific. They're like, oh, what do I do with this? And what do I do with that? And I'm like, yeah, but the common themes that I kind of hear is, one, they want us to have an opinion. because there's a difference between being a subject matter expert and just opining on their information, and there's another thing to help guide the client. So having an opinion is important. Doesn't mean we're shoving it down their throat and saying this is what you have to do, but having an opinion is important to them because they need that. And then asking tough questions. Those are the two common themes that I always hear. Like, that's my definition, generally speaking, of business strategy. But then it's, how do you incorporate that kind of thought process and communication in storytelling, working with your clients? So I guess, that's the question. How do those things kind of, intersect?
Sure. Well, I will say one of the big things that I've realized since my time in Hollywood is that people think that story is the answer. I mean, good grief. I mean, you sit in Hollywood, you think, oh, everything is about story. It's this magic wand. You just wave over things and things magically get better. And it seems like it if you're in Hollywood, because that's what drives the whole financial model, the whole financial engine of Hollywood. But once you get into business, you realize that there are powerful conversations that go down every day. And a lot of times a traditional story doesn't even come into the picture. So that really made me scratch my head for a while, saying, okay, well, is story really the answer? But there's powerful communication. I mean, there's sales. I mean, you can write a headline. You can just have a conversation and give a pitch to someone and they say yes. So what's the bigger thing above that? And so here's what I'd like to offer in terms of what is strategic communication. The thing that I always talk about with my clients is the idea of the definition of what a story is and the fact that it operates on the tactical level, as in telling a story over the water cooler, like the things that we always know about. But then the bigger picture that drives everything happens at the 40,000 foot strategic level. And that strategic level is all about the definition of the story. And this comes from some of the early writings of Donald Miller, who, if you're familiar with building a story brand, some of his early fiction writings talk about this, and then I've expanded on it. It goes like this. The definition of a story is where a character wants something, overcomes obstacles to get it, and experiences transformation as a result. I'm telling you, if you write those phrases down and you put them on your wall and you start applying them, they will have an effect on every communication you have with any human being for any reason ever. And if it sounds like I'm exaggerating, I promise I'm not. It's that big.
Elevate your firm with a virtual CFO playbook, how to land $60,000 per year clients and provide a killer client experience. This comprehensive online series of modules provides you with the essential tools to create and deliver scalable VCFO services. Developed from Summit's successful approach, which propelled them from $500,000 to over $10 million in revenue in 10 years. This playbook will equip you with the skills to take your firm to the next level. Additionally, upon completion, you can receive 24 hours of CPE credit for the course. Ready to grow your firm? Enroll now at vcfoplaybook.summitcpa.net.
So given the emphasis you just put on it,
yeah,
someone might have said, oh, I missed what he said. Can you repeat one more time? You said this is really important. So someone who was about to rewind.
Hey, everyone, this is a big deal.
Yes, just one more repetition around that.
So it is, the definition of a story is when a character wants something, overcomes obstacles to get it, and experiences transformation as a result.
Yep, thank you.
And when you have that, you can boil this down to core forces of character identity, desire, obstacles, and the change, the transformation that you want to see happen. And when you talk about communication within the context of identity, desire, obstacles, and change, you've got narrative forces operating at the same level of gravity. That is a really, really big deal. So when you talk about having an opinion, Adam, the idea of having an opinion and asking tough questions, you look back at this definition and you say, okay, who are the what are the storylines in play? So say it's an advisor is talking with a client and Tom, I know you've been in this position all the time. You're looking at the numbers and you're saying, okay, there's a runway here, there's a cash burn, this runway is not endless and the client isn't seeing this. So
Yep.
you are the advisor who says, okay, I want to help the client realize that they need to change something. And what's getting in their way? Well, they don't see it yet. So I need to help them see that. Meanwhile, you have this opposing storyline happening where your client says, no, it's going to work out. We got pipeline stuff going on. We're working on deals, and you're saying, dude, how are we going to, you have an opinion of what you think might be necessary.
Yeah.
You have to ask those tough questions. That's where the stuff starts getting boots on the ground. It goes from the strategic down to the tactical, asking those tough questions.
Yeah. Sorry, didn't mean to interrupt you, Jeff, but I just had a conversation with a client similar to that where they're in trouble and they don't see it. So what I did was, okay, let me say your sales for the last 6 months, which have been low. If I just say if that continues at this rate, you're going to run out of cash as of this date. And they had a couple places where they poked around and said, are you right? And then they got convinced. And then the sales guy was all upset, like, I don't want to be in a company that's that small, which was perfect because I said, okay, this is what you've been doing. How are you going to change the sales to where it goes up? But what I'm telling you is if you don't, what decision would you make? And we started talking about salary reductions or reducing people or things that we could do to cut cost. But it was, I think, similar to what you're saying is I tried to get them onto the same kind of story. They wanted to poke a little bit on the facts, but I sort of forced them to deal with this model. If this is what you're looking at, what would you do around that? And we had a pretty productive conversation around that.
Awesome.
So Jeff, with that, then where does empathy kind of, how does that play a role in, strategic storytelling? Because to some degree, I mean, you got to kind of meet people where they are emotionally a little bit as well in those conversations. And I think in general practice, we're kind of, by the book, just numbers people. We're very binary in our delivery. So how does that kind of, how do you address that, I guess?
Yeah, that's part of the whole thing, because when you look at that big picture, we always hear about, okay, we'll sell with the audience in mind, communicate with the audience in mind. And that's 100% true. Unfortunately, a lot of the time, if one is technically minded, especially in the accounting world, when you say, well, hey, here are the numbers, and you don't actively think about what's happening in the heart and mind of the client. That's where the disconnect happens. And I got to tell you, there was this amazing thing that happened with Hannah Hood, one of the virtual CFOs on the Summit team, where we were working one-on-one, and I asked her, how have things happened with, what's happening with clients, in terms of a scenario that we could work with for one of the communication tools. And she said, oh, absolutely. Here's working with a client who is a CEO of an agency, and she is looking at a number which represents her company's EBITDA, and she wants to protect the future value of her company because she wants to exit eventually. The flip side on that is she really, really cares about her people. And she was looking at the numbers and she's going, I want to take care of my people, but man, I also want to protect this. And so Hannah and I were talking about, okay, so what are the core things? One of the other concepts that I talk about is the concept of the thing under the thing. So many people talk about what's on the surface. So it's just like an iceberg. You see just the tip of the iceberg, but the real bulk, the real mass is hiding under the surface. And that's what really matters. So when people talk about the things that they care about, that stuff is attached to things deep under the surface, either mentally or psychologically. And so Hannah and I were talking about, okay, so what are the things under the things for your client? And so it came down to this idea of, well, she's really, she cares about the future value of her company, but she cares about her people now. And she feels like she has to choose between the two. And she feels like it's a binary kind of a scenario. And so we kept talking, and Hannah came up with this idea, this image of a scale where it's like, okay, well, what if you could do both? What if you could balance both of them? And she said, you know what? I know how to adjust my forecast. And she told me later that when she met with that client, that CEO client, the next time, She said, I understand that you really want to protect the value of your company. You want to take care of your people. Now, here are some ways that we can do both. And here's what would need to happen to sales in order for that to happen. And the CEO's client said, oh, well, I can do that. I mean, and Hannah told me, she said she could literally see the weight lifting off her client's shoulders. And by the next thing you know, the client is in tears of happiness because she was so relieved that she didn't have to choose between her future with her company and her people now. I mean, that's when you can say, okay, these aren't just numbers. Numbers represent things that people care about. And when you start thinking about that, when you dig into that, that's when you get clients who stay with you for life.
Yeah. It's a great story. You've got me thinking about what I've come to believe is maybe one of the biggest selling pieces. So just back up quickly. Adam and I do a lot of coaching of other accountants who want to do virtual CFO and advising work. Individual conversations. A lot of the conversations go something like, can you tell me more about your tools and your process? Because I don't offer currently like a forecast is one of the big ones, or cash flow or things like that. That's where they focus. The other very common question is, I can't believe you guys can get away with charging an average of $60,000 or more per year for the work that you do. How could I do that? And what I'm coming to believe is, if you can't get the advisory kind of stuff down with communications and strategic storytelling, you probably can't charge that much. Because even a really good forecast, if all you're going to do is present a set of numbers and say, here are the numbers, what do you think, client? I think they're accurate. Why would someone pay a lot versus that kind of story? If that kind of thing happens with Hannah, where I know you well enough to know all about you and I can communicate well to make those connections and give that advice, all of a sudden you got people paying. I would pay a lot for that. And to your point, you've got a customer for a really long time because of that.
Yeah. Well, here's something that I've been thinking about a lot. There was a time in my Hollywood years, I was at Warner Brothers Studios at a panel. And there was a guy who was one of the guests on the panel who was a re-recording mixer. He was a staff re-recording mixer at Warner Brothers. And he was, so what he does every day, he sits in a movie theater, in his own personal movie theater, with a mixing console that literally stretches across the room. It's just this massive thing. And someone asked him, how do you stay on top of the technology to do what you do? And he said, you have to learn the tools like the back of your hand. And the more impressive the tools are, the more you need to know them like the back of their hand so they can become invisible. And the point that he was making was, you have to know the tools, you have to have the fundamentals, you have to know your stuff, but then you have to make all the tools disappear so you can get into the experience get to the point of creating the experience of the movie. And that is where I think I would be willing to say that that's a really important part of client advisory. When you get to the point where you have clean numbers, you have your tech stack, you have all the foundations. Now you're saying, okay, what is the experience in my head, in the client's head? What needs to happen? What's getting in our way? That's when the really powerful stuff happens.
That's so interesting, because I was going to ask you, the evolution of the digital platforms and technologies, just kind of thinking about how accountants and, how they can adapt their storytelling and communication strategies to still stay relevant and engaging. And I think that for a lot of us, we like to show off those cool tools, you know what I mean? So we go right to the reports and stuff. But I wrote down whenever you're talking, like, make the tools invisible. And I think that's really, so my question is going to be, how do we stay relevant? But to you, it's like, make sure that you know the tool so well that it's not that they're so focused on, kind of the conversation, if you will, as opposed to really focusing on the tools, right? So even if that stuff's getting really cool and slick, that's like more for us, and then just kind of focus on the storytelling. Is that kind of how I'm hearing that?
Well, I would say, I mean, again, I want to make sure people understand that this is not just storytelling, because a lot of people, they think with that word storytelling and they say, oh, talk about what happened last night. I'm talking way bigger strategic picture. of which tactical storytelling is just one of an entire toolbox of tools of communication. So that's one of the elements here. It is so much broader than telling a story in the traditional sense. But let me go back. Let me go back to clarify what. So what's the specific question on your mind right now, Adam?
Well, I was just, the more and more, you'd hit on it earlier about the AI and everything. And again, these things are becoming more and more prevalent, which to some degree you would think would push us out because they are becoming, a little bit more dynamic. Clients are going to be able to ask them questions. They're going to be able to prompt data. They're going to be able to do a lot of those things. But I mean, I think that whenever I'm considering AI and all these other different tools, it goes right back to the fact is that you have a balance sheet and you have an income statement. You don't know how to make them work together to drive to your goal. So, regardless if an AI product can show you why something was off, it's not explaining, it's not making that correlation to your business model and your future planning and all those kind of things. So I was just trying to figure out, I was going to ask you from a strategic communication standpoint, how do we make sure that there's enough space for us in that regard? But what I heard you say was by knowing those tools so inside and out, making them our tools, that we can make them kind of appear invisible, if you will, to the client because we're guiding that conversation, that communication strategy.
Yes. And I will say, man, that you think people are freaking out in accounting about AI. You want to talk to some of my friends back in Hollywood who are saying, AI can make pictures. AI can generate sounds and mix sounds, and they can write scripts. There are a lot of people who are really scared.
Right.
And so that's, the question is, how do you maintain the humanity? What is the human element in all this? And one of the really big hurdles of humanity is it is next to impossible to read the label from the inside of our own bottle. How many people have you seen get a gold medal at the Olympics on their own? Everyone has a coach. Everyone has an advisor who operates at an elite level. And that, I think, is what advisors really need to lean into and say, hey, yes, the tools are amazing. The tools are slick. They're adjusting faster than we can imagine. But man, what's on your mind? What's on your heart? What do you actually want? Because no AI platform is going to tell you that. And no one is going to be able to say, have you thought about this, when all the time you've been stuck in your head going there instead of over here?
Yeah, I mean, that makes total sense. So in kind of that same train of thought, can you outline, a few communication skills that, I mean, I think that you think are critical for success whenever, interacting in client advisory roles?
Yes. The number one is go back to that definition of what a story is, where the character wants something, overcomes obstacles to get it, and experiences transformation as a result. Then when you get that, just ask yourself, what are the storylines happening right now? How are they lining up? And include yourself in that as the advisor, as a business owner, as whatever, and say, what do I want? What does the business want? What does the client want? What does the board want? What do the VCs want? What does the audience want? What does, all insert stakeholders here, because the more storylines you get in the conversation, the more complicated things can get. But the conversation always centers around how can we get the stories to line up so that everyone can get what they want. So that's the first thing that I would say, is really figure out that story definition and apply it to your own position. That, right there, that's going to be a game changer for someone, guaranteed. Then the next thing is, when you figure out what to take from what's on the surface and how to apply it to what people truly care about, that is where deep emotional and psychological connections happen. That is what I call the thing under the thing. And when you talk about that, some people say, oh, well, you're talking about symbolism, right? And and I say, yes, that can be part of it. I mean, because if you look at an American flag, it's just stars and stripes in a design. But man, There are thousands of things, of ideas, sometimes diametrically opposed ideas that people have attached in their hearts and minds to that design, that visual design. We make meaning out of things every moment out of every day. So if you see the number 1 million or 50 million, what does that number mean? Well, it can mean all kinds of things. It can mean this is how much debt we have. This is how much sales we have to get. This is how much, this is what my, this is what I could pocket if I sell, or it's just, it all depends on the meaning that you attach to the surface thing. So that's the next question. Once you figure out that storytelling, the strategic view of storytelling, start thinking about what's on the surface and what are the things hanging out underneath the surface. What are the things under the thing that people truly care about?
Is that cool just to straight up ask the client, like, what does that mean to you? That kind of a thing whenever you're getting to some of those items, whenever you're like, hey, we did, 12% EBITDA, you made 11, $1.1 million, and then just basically call it out, say, hey, what does this mean to you? What do you think about whenever you hear these numbers, those kind of things, and just try to pick their brain a little bit about whether they're going to evaluation and a potential sale, or they're going, hey, it means I got money in the bank. It means, I'm doing a good job, those kind of things. So do you suggest just like calling that out in the conversation sometimes?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of the best things you can do as an advisor, as a coach, is to have a super powerful list of questions. 9 out of 10 times the answers, the real answers that matter, are lying in the hearts and minds of your audience, and the hearts and minds of your client. So when you can take your expertise and make the tools of that expertise disappear, such that the only thing remains is the experience of being guided to help find the answers, that's asking great questions is a fundamental part of that, for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, what Jeff's talking about, Adam, also seems to fit very much in line with you always encouraging us to spend more time thinking about the client. And often it's come in terms of get the processes and the tools figured out so we're not spending all of our time there. That frees us up. Because Jeff, a lot of what you're talking about does require some really good thought, right? Who are all the stakeholders and what are their stories and how do they connect and what's a thing under a thing? That takes some really good thought, which is what we should be giving to our clients. It's easy if you let the tools take up all of your time. They'll take it all up. And if you don't make that more efficient, you're spending all your time just getting that part.
Yeah.
Correct. If you don't mind if I come back, because one of the tools you taught me was the and, but, therefore.
Yeah.
And if you don't mind telling sort of how that worked, because it also goes into the value of the coaching.
Mm-hmm.
So you and I worked through a client problem. I'll tell what this was in a second, but I found myself the way I approached it very different using this tool. And then also going through sort of a rough draft with you and then sort of dramatically changing it into a successful piece in doing that.
Yeah.
But coming to with a disagreement, kind of what are we agreeing on, but there's something different, and then therefore here's what we should do. And I had a client that had graduated to where he was no longer using me as a CFO. They hired an internal person, great success. They were continuing to use our tax team. And without getting too technical about all the accounting pieces, there was a tax law change last year related to research expense that you couldn't deduct as more. And this client thought this was a terrible idea. And something else I knew about the client was he was really good at arguing. And one of the things that made him successful is he would listen to opinions and then choose something. So me included, expert in saying you should be doing A, but there's options B and C. And he'll go, yep, I heard you, I'm choosing B. And he was good at that. So in the arguments with our tax team, he had decided, I want the taxes done this way. I'm not going to follow this rule around the research, to the point where our tax team said, we won't do the return for you. And we were really at risk of losing that client.
Yeah.
So I reached out to him and said, hey, would you like to have a conversation? And after you and I talked about it, I kind of went through kind of this, and you helped me get through the and, but, therefore. And the way I approached a conversation was very different, including I sort of took it as I was excited about it, kind of let me just get some data and see how this goes. And that took some of the risk out of it. But I also let him tell me what he thought was going on and then said, are you open to a different opinion? And just said, hey, here's the and. You and I both agree this new law is bad for you. And for years, you've done the R&D tax credit kind of stuff that you've done. He's like, yep. I said, here's the difference, the but. You think you have a choice of saying, if I don't take the tax credit this year, I don't have to follow the new law and call research. He's like, yep. So I explained to him how those were really two different things and he didn't have the choice. And that therefore was, if you choose to do this, you have set up a huge red flag for the IRS by saying, I had research in all these past 4 years when I got the credit. Suddenly a new law comes out and I claim I don't have any research. And he's like, oh. And he asked me a couple of questions, but he went back and allowed us to do the return that way.
Yeah.
It was using this technique, though, I think that really helped and he felt listened to. And so your coaching helped, but also that tool helped a lot in that approach.
Yeah. Well, and so, and just to extend that a bit, the fact that that client didn't leave and that they're still staying,
right?
That's, that is a significant
money to us, right?
That's money going right into the company's pocket in exchange for valuable services like what you just described, worth every single penny, man.
Right. And I remember mentioning to you afterwards, I mean, my conversation with him was like a Friday at like 5:30 when he texted back and said, hey, can you talk? And I'll be honest, my reaction was, I don't want to. I'm done for the week. Why would I want to have this contentious conversation? And luckily, and probably partly because I went well, I was thrilled after that conversation. And he was happy too. It was something I should have done. But I even approached it sort of in a minute, like calling, like, this is not where I want to be spending my time on Friday at 5:30.
Yeah. So, I mean, you can see this is not about telling a story over the water cooler. This is looking at communication strategy, human connection, and saying, how can we help our people get what they want? That's the big picture of what's happening here.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, we talked about, kind of the outline for success. What about the pitfalls? I mean, what are some of the common things that you're hearing or seeing, things that we should definitely avoid at all costs? You got a short list of any of that stuff?
I think when people talk about now, one of the big things is when you use a tool, for instance, like ABT, which we don't really have time to get into the details of how it works and how it's powerful. But one of the big pitfalls that people get into is the idea of we're hammering on different problems and we're not agreed on the same points of conflict. And that's why something like this ABT tool really forces you to get clear on, okay, what is the problem? What do we want? What's keeping us from getting it? And then when you back up from that and say, okay, what do we actually both want? What future can we paint for ourselves that we're both agreed on? Then you start from a place of agreement. Then you start saying, okay, and here's what's keeping us from getting that. And then when you're actually talking about the same thing, you don't go around in circles and say, oh, well, that's not, but this thing. And you say, no, but that thing, and then everyone just ends up frustrated. I'd say another pitfall that people talk about is when they get into the idea of telling stories as a tactical tool, which is absolutely an incredibly powerful thing. I mean, we've been doing it in one form or another all throughout this episode here. A lot of the times people will tell a tactical story for the wrong reason. They'll tell it to make themselves look good as opposed to being of service to the audience. And if you tell a story that says, hey, look, I'm amazing. And the audience says, so I want to be amazing. I don't care about you. How is this going to help me? So that is a danger for sure when it comes to telling tactical stories.
If I can add just one thing to it, that goes very much in line with one of our thinkings, which is we are the guide and the client is the hero on that journey. And so our 100%. Job is to sort of help them get there. And this pitfall will be the piece of like, hey, let me tell you how freaking awesome I am. And if I'm doing that, then I am not following that. You
didn't see Yoda in Star Wars. You didn't say, awesome I am. I am amazing. I am.
Yeah.
What about you? That's not how Yoda. He went.
That was a good impression.
Peggy, you've seen the movie once or twice.
minus the green skin and the ear hair. So
yeah, that's true.
So I will say one of the other elements of this is a very powerful thing to happen internally with clients. It's also equally powerful externally. When you're telling the world about who you are and what you do and why people should work with you instead of everyone else. And that's one of the places that I want to say that Summit is such, again, you guys are such rock stars because you're saying, hey, we are not a faceless company. We put people out here. I mean, for a lot of times, it was Jody Grundon getting up on stage and talking. And then, Adam, you're working, doing the same thing and also working with clients behind the scenes. And you guys are trading off there. But when you guys figured out that, hey, we want to grow this thing, you said, hey, let's go into new verticals and let's get experts in those verticals and they can go out and talk to the world. And that is super, super cool.
Yeah. And difficult.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But no, I mean, I do like the way you've been able to kind of demystify storytelling. I think that in its own right is a little bit, especially for more binary people where we're just like ones and zeros and thinking about, financial stuff all day long. Being able to hear the word storytelling, it's like, oh man, do I have to tell my fishing trip and come up with all these analogies and,
Right.
try to get, is that how I'm trying to create relationship? But, what you're really talking about is strategic communication and it's just the everyday stuff. So now you don't feel like you have to come up with an actual story, but you can use kind of the tools from the story inside of it, to help kind of guide those strategic conversations, which I think is super helpful. And I do kind of the same thing, but I also liked your point of, making sure you start with a common ground where you agree, because that's always been kind of a secret to de-escalate a situation whenever a client's upset is, you kind of match their tone level and you're like, yep, I'm upset about that too. Like make sure that you're kind of coming from that common place, and then you can kind of slowly guide them to somewhere else. And we always tell the team, we're always like, the answer is always yes, but so I can always agree with you, Jeff. I'll always say yes, but this is what you need to do. And then you might go, well, I don't like that. Be like, yeah, me neither. So let's come up with a different plan. And they're like, oh, okay. You know what I mean? And it's an easy, they're not defensive right out of the gate because they hear you agreeing and then saying what they have to do. And then whenever they hear on the unrealistic expectation, they're like, doesn't seem like a very good path. So those are great points, I think, in terms of avoiding, pitfalls of coming in just ready to stand on your ground and oppose them or tell them what they're going to do. Already have that story preconceived and not meeting them where they're at.
Yeah. Well, I mean, when people look up storytelling and brain science or neuroscience, you'll learn all sorts of things about the chemicals that the brain dumps into the bloodstream when they hear a story, for either good or for bad. And man, when if one was to go into a contentious conversation with your guns blazing, you're literally causing your audience or your client's brain to start dumping cortisol into their bloodstream, and their pulse quickens, their arteries widen up for blood flow, and their brain shuts down. It's just, you're trying to escape the saber-toothed tiger, proverbially. Yeah. So man, starting at a place of, here's what we all want. Now let's get it together. Let's find that change. Let's make this change happen together. Man, that is a powerful, powerful way to be as an advisor when we help people get what they want.
Yeah. Knowing that this is a skill that people can build. I love that you're continuing. You help me tremendously, but you're continuing to offer help people, because I really do think it's a key differentiator between a really good advisor and one who's mediocre in doing that ability to make that connection. If you don't mind, if we switch then to something more fun. So people heard Hollywood, that probably piques people's interest. I'm curious, people you have met, any sort of most impressive famous person, and why you think of people that you met in Hollywood?
I will say most of the work I did in Hollywood was not, it was in the post-production side. So it was after everything had been shot. But every once in a while, there was a time when I was backstage at a studio where I was helping with some of the content, and it was a daily entertainment news show. And Britney Spears was, she was standing right there in the hallway, waiting to walk on. And I'm looking at her, I'm going, she's not a large person, but man, just thinking what she represents to all the people, with millions and millions of people around the world. It was just kind of crazy to think about that.
Interesting.
Yeah. So it was cool. And next thing you know, they said, please welcome to the studio, Britney Spears. And the crowd goes nuts, and out she walks, and there on goes the show.
That's a cool experience to see kind of the back scenes, how it works.
Yeah.
He left out the part where he was like, "Hey, Brittany, I'm your biggest fan. Can I get an autograph? Please sign my face."
Yeah,
that's okay. We won't. Don't worry. We'll edit that part out.
That's the kind of stuff that gets you thrown out of the studio.
You're like, play it cool.
Sure.
That's great. Well, Jeff, this is fantastic. Thank you very much. I mean, I've seen you live out this consulting piece. It's helped us, and I think you make a really compelling case in doing this. So I think it's wonderful.
Awesome. Thank you so much, guys.
Yep. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Enjoy this podcast? Visit our website, summitcpa.net, to get more tips and strategy for achieving modern CPA firm success. We're here to be a resource in this ever-changing industry.